Do you want to learn faster or teach better? If yes, then The Talent Code by Coyle is a book you should consider reading. Or you can just watch this video in which I'll tell you the most important lessons I've learned from it and how they have changed the way I do things. Sounds good? Then let's begin. At one point or another, you must have wondered why some people excel at what they do. The good old nature versus nurture debate and a handful of other theories look great on paper, but they don't score high in practicality. Sure, if perfect genes meet a perfect environment, the result can be a Michael Jordan, but maybe there's more to that. Hopefully, something you can apply to your own endeavors and thereby improve much faster. A single outlier can always be explained away by attributing their prowess to chance, but if you have a lot of them, things get more interesting. This is why Coyle examines so-called talent hotbeds, where an extraordinary amount of talent seems to spring from nowhere. His subjects are as diverse as musicians, painters, writers, tennis and soccer players, chess grandmasters, golfers, teachers and coaches. They are the best of the best of the best in their respective fields, the creme de la creme, consistently outperforming their competitors. The goal is to find out whether they train or think differently from mere mortals and whether there's an overarching pattern that accounts for their exceptional achievements. A talent code, if you will. Coyle approaches this problem scientifically and therefore begins by providing a rigorous definition of talent. For the purposes of his book, it is the possession of repeatable skills that don't depend on physical size. He does mention basketball several times, but for the most part, this definition is satisfactory. The book is quite well written, so it's always clear what he means. To understand why people doing vastly different things excel at them, he looks at the big picture. The details are obviously important, but he treats them as manifestations of a general truth, the offspring of something bigger. Something we all have in common, regardless of age, gender, education, ethnicity or proclivities. That something is the brain. Every human skill is created by chains of nerve fibers carrying electrical impulses. Whether you're playing chess or driving a Formula 1 car, what ultimately happens is that certain neurons fire in a certain sequence. This creates a neural circuit that tells your body what to do, and your muscles and other organs duly oblige. The more skilled you are, the faster and stronger the electrical impulses, which is why it takes you less time and effort to achieve the same thing. The movement or mental computation can even become subconscious and almost instantaneous. A perfect execution without your having to think about it. And all this owing to a single substance that goes by the name of myelin. Myelin is a neuroinsulator that wraps around the aforementioned nerve fibers. Together with its supporter cells, known as white matter, it constitutes more than half of the brain mass. Every time a nerve fires, more myelin gets wrapped around it, which enables the corresponding neural signal to travel faster and also shortens the intervals between subsequent firings. As a result, your information processing capacity can be improved by up to 3,000 times. This is a very big number, but if you juxtapose Lionel Messi in his prime with an average toddler, you might find it rather small. Playing soccer at an elite level requires countless well-insulated neural circuits, and myelination takes time. But time doing what? Sitting on a couch buried under bags of potato chips won't result in anything of value. You have to practice to work for whatever it is that you want to achieve. As Michelangelo once said, if people knew how hard I had to work to gain my mastery, it wouldn't seem so wonderful at all. This sounds obvious, yet incomplete, for it doesn't address a key question. What's the best way to practice? In every competitive field, there are numerous schools of thought yielding varying degrees of success, and going through all of them would be quite confusing, not to mention impossible. Luckily, Coyle has done a great job identifying the best ones and what they have in common. He calls the highly productive stage of learning at an almost magical rate deep practice. It should be done at the edge of your current ability, just within reach, and it has 5 distinct phases. First, you have to absorb the whole thing. Let's say that you're learning to play a new song on the piano. You should listen attentively to the entire piece to get a better understanding of it and of what you're trying to accomplish. Take it all in, the notes, the rhythm, the everything. Is it similar to something you can already play well, or is it totally new to you? Either way, you have to break it into chunks or small parts. These can vary from individual notes to elaborate combinations thereof, which you can practice separately and not necessarily in order. Since simpler chunks get embedded in more complicated ones, it is crucial to master the basics first. This is why violinists spend so much time learning to hold their instrument properly and then to produce single notes before they tackle anything an audience would like to hear. A skill wrongly learned cannot be easily unlearned. You can't just destroy the myelin, although it degenerates over time by itself, which is why you have to practice regularly. As the famous pianist Vladimir Horowitz once said, "If I skip practice for 1 day, I notice. If I skip practice for 2 days, my wife notices. If I skip practice for 3 days, the world notices." The way to correct erroneous skills is to insulate new neural circuits, which might be even harder than starting from scratch because you have to actively desist from what feels natural to you. It's much more efficient to learn it properly from the start, if not so entertaining. In a way, everything's like learning to read. You start with single letters, then groups of letters, then words, then sentences. You can't skip steps. After having broken the new skill into chunks, you have to slow it down. This will allow you to pay more attention to errors and will show you whether you need to further refine the chunks. Whether you're learning a new card trick or how to deadlift, the idea is to master the technique first and worry about speed and weight later. No elite runner only runs, and even Michael Phelps used to do a ton of drills besides swimming. They say that medals are won in the gym, and chunking is the reason why. It allows you to focus on individual components and thereby improve the whole. There's no way around it on the way to GOAT. Even in more creative fields such as writing, it makes a lot of sense to zero in on single things because you can learn them better this way. Oscar Wilde has a very pertinent quote regarding this. I have spent most of the day putting in a comma and the rest of the day taking it out. As a writer and a former copy editor, I can totally relate. If you ask me how many times I've edited parts of my text that other people would deem satisfactory, I'll have to admit that I have no clue because I'm not counting. I think about my craft all the time and nothing is unworthy of my undivided attention. I love the process and every chunk of it. Speaking of which, the process has to be repeated. And then you have to do it again, many times, always at the edge of what you can do during each iteration. This doesn't mean that if you're a runner, you should only sprint. Each component of your training has different objectives, of which top speed is only one. You also need to improve your aerobic capacity, your running efficiency, your aerobic endurance, your lactate threshold, your VO2 max, and so on, while reducing the risk of injury. It's very complicated even for professionals. And while calling your fast intervals quality work is not entirely wrong, doing just this won't get you very far. The goal of all the repetitions is to insulate the corresponding nerve fibers so well that you don't have to think anymore. Just like you don't have to remember that the letter T has a horizontal line around the middle when you're writing a word that contains it, you should be able to move correctly without active mental effort. Figure skating would be impossible otherwise. You have to develop a feeling for what you do to reach a point where errors bother you even if you can't quite pinpoint them. You should learn to recognize some optimal performance in order to improve it. If you play the wrong note on your violin, this should make you cringe. You should find it ugly and disturbing. You should want to nail that note before moving on with the piece, although such interruptions are beneficial only in fields where perfection is clearly defined. If you're playing soccer, for example, you will be better off working on your errors later. After all, skill is insulation that wraps neural circuits and grows according to certain signals, and the circuits in question vary depending on the skill itself. Soccer is a team sport where part of the feedback comes from your opponents, so you need to practice ball recovery as well. In music, there's usually a perfect way to execute, and your only opponent is you. The details differ, but the principle is the same. You should maximize the myelin around the right circuits, and then you should build some more. Luckily, it's never too late to do that. Even though the natural waves of myelination end in your 30s, the overall volume on myelin increases until your 50s, and you retain the ability to add more myelin through deep practice until you die. To illustrate the difference between deep and normal practice, Daniel Coyle gives an example similar to what I'll show you in a moment. You will see two sets of words, and your task will be to remember as many as possible after looking at each set for a few seconds. You may pause the video now. Now pause the video again and try to recall as many words as possible. Ready? Did you find column A or column B easier? If you're like most people, it won't be even close, and you should have successfully recalled 3 times more words from the set containing fragments than from the normal one. This is because you had to think, to exert your brain, however mildly. If you had to sit a test, you would score 300% higher after spending the same amount of time studying. This is deep practice. Obviously, deleting random letters can be a quite tedious exercise, although AI can probably do it for you nowadays. But there's a much more practical way to acquire lasting knowledge faster. Daniel Coyle mentions another experiment where 2 groups of students had to prepare for a test. Group A studied the materials 4 times, whereas Group B studied them only once but were tested 3 times. A week later, both groups were tested and Group B scored 50% higher despite having studied 4 times less. This is powerful stuff. After reading a book, you can try telling about it to a friend or even to yourself to see how much more of it you'll remember a few months or years later. In accessing the information, you'll tell your brain that it's important and myelin will do the rest. I knew about this phenomenon earlier, but the talent code quantified it and I've been exploiting it ever more ever since. It works. This is why you should repeat the name of someone you have just met or use a new word you have learned. Myelin cares about actions, not intentions, so you have to act. Let's do a quick recap. Deep practice involves absorbing the whole thing, breaking it into chunks, slowing it down, repeating it, and learning to feel it. As you can see, it isn't easy. It requires a lot of energy, which is why you can't do it all day long and why so many people give up with little to show for. Especially if they have had to learn the skill as opposed to having wanted to learn it. Hyper-polyglots eat languages for breakfast because they love it, not because they've lost a bet. This is where ignition comes in, the fuel that keeps you going. Talent requires deep practice requires vast amounts of energy, and so-called primal cues trigger huge opportunities of energy. When Eliud Kipchoge broke the 2-hour barrier in the marathon, countless people started running. Alex Honnold's free soloing of the 900-meter El Capitan had a similar effect on the rock climbing community, and the moon landing inspired a mountain of future scientists. But the cues don't have to be as spectacular to work. A visit to the local zoo or a random act of kindness can suffice, especially if these events keep happening. Here too, consistency is key, and having multiple primal cues in the early stages can be the difference between a Charlie Chaplin and a nobody. One of the greatest chess players of all time, Magnus Carlsen, got ignited because his sister used to beat him all the time. Most elite sprinters are not firstborn and were trying to keep up with their older siblings when they were little. Michelangelo didn't have to look far to see a masterpiece in 15th century Florence. Modern Brazilian kids could not avoid soccer even if they tried. The list goes on and on and on. The decision to pursue something is often not even conscious. Daniel Coyle mentions an experiment where college students had to read magazine articles, including a short autobiographical statement by a guy called Nathan Jackson. When Nathan started studying, he hadn't found his passion yet, but he quickly grew fond of math and now boasted a happy career in academia. For half the students, the article was left untouched, but the other half received a tweaked version of it, according to which they shared a birthday with Nathan. When later asked to tackle an unsolvable mathematical problem, the birthday buddies worked on average 65% longer before giving up. Even more remarkable results were reported in another experiment where 400 fifth graders had to solve a series of puzzles. Round 1 was easy, and in addition to their score, each child received a 6-letter compliment assigned at random. Either you must be smart at this, or you must have worked really hard. In round 2, they got to choose between an easier and a more difficult test, and 90% of those who had been praised for their effort chose the latter. In contrast, most of their classmates went for the easy one, probably to avoid making mistakes which would ruin their reputation. Round 3 was uniformly harder, and unlike their friends, the intelligent kids hated it and showed much less creativity in their solutions. Round 4 was the most revealing. The level of difficulty was the same as in round 1, and those who had been commended for their hard work scored 30% higher than on their first attempt. But the other ones, whose average score in round 1 was the same as that of the hard workers, showed a 20% decline. Surprised by this, the researchers redid the study 5 times and the results were consistent. Apparently, identifying as a hard worker pays better dividends than thinking you are Einstein. In yet another experiment, researchers studied 157 randomly selected children from a few weeks before they started learning to play a musical instrument up to their high school graduation. The kids had to say how long they planned to play, choosing between through this year, through primary school, through high school, and all my life. The scientists measured how much each child practiced each week and plotted the data against their performance. The results were mind-boggling. Those who had voiced a long-term commitment that worked only 20 minutes a week improved faster than the short-termers who practiced 90 minutes a week. It is safe to assume that the former wanted to learn how to play, whereas the latter was simply sent to music lessons by their parents. Not intelligence, but motivation begot success. The results of these experiments are far from trivial, and the talent code is full of similar ones. The most obvious conclusions are that genius is overrated and that we should pay attention to what fascinates children and praise them for their effort. This applies to adults as well. If anything, motivation becomes even more important as we age, especially intrinsic motivation. When I was a kid, I didn't like sports, so I didn't practice and started falling behind quite markedly. Before long, I became the least athletic of my classmates, even though I was skinny. But age 26, I moved to Germany and saw that even septuagenarians exercised regularly, and this ignited me. Being less fit than someone more than twice your age is not a good place to be, so I started training. The Germans are quite sporty, so there was no shortage of primal cues to keep me going until I no longer needed anything extrinsic. 4 years after my arrival, I could proudly boast 3 100-kilometer ultra hikes completed within 4 months. An ultra hike is something like an ultramarathon, except you walk with a backpack and have fewer aid stations. A couple of years ago, I ran a marathon as well. It was much easier. But enough about me. Let's go back to Daniel Coyle and his wonderful book. Combining everything he's learned, he has created a blueprint how to teach, or, as he calls it, how to practice master coaching. He identifies 4 virtues thereof, which world-class coaches have in common. The first he calls the matrix, and it comprises the vast amount of field-specific technical knowledge necessary to effectively address the student's efforts. It takes a long time to accumulate, for Myelin is not a sprinter. A physics teacher should understand the problem before they can teach it well, and should ideally be able to tackle it from several starting points. They should have seen what works and what doesn't, and should know what students find difficult to grasp. By the same token, a music instructor should be able to quickly assess a new student to decide where to start. Maybe the student already sings well but looks like a dead tree when they do so, in which case they need help with expressing their personality. Or maybe it's the other way around, so the instructor will have to tell them precisely how to produce certain sounds. The tone goes there, the air should go out like this, and so on. Being able to do something is not the same as being able to explain it. Jimi Hendrix didn't know how to read musical notes, and most people cannot describe the way they drive. If you don't trust me, try it. How detailed can you go? The second virtue is perceptiveness. The coach should notice everything that has to do with learning, from mood to body language. Perhaps the student makes an almost imperceptible grimace when doing something, or their voice gets agitated when talking about it. Perhaps their attitude has changed and they no longer show enthusiasm. Maybe they're simply tired. No detail is too small or trivial. Everything's interconnected, though not obviously so, which makes the job of the master coach all the more difficult. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, no game plan that covers everything. You have to customize. Which brings us to the third virtue, called the GPS reflex. Like a navigation system, the information you convey should be precise and to the point. Not maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea if considered trying this next time. Just say do this, and say it often. Except in sports like soccer, in which case you should wait until the game is over. That is, if you're observing an actual game. During drills, you should be vocal. You should also figure out what type of feedback works best for each student. Does Joe respond better to criticism and Johnny to praise? Is it something else entirely? Are you trying to get someone to like your sport or subject, or are you attempting to squeeze out a few seconds from Eliud Kipchoge's marathon time? The last two examples are fundamentally different, for one of them targets the ignition stage, whereas the other is concerned with deep practice. These are two distinct acts in the game of perfection. Speaking of place, the fourth virtue of master coaching is called theatrical honesty. A great coach is a great communicator, and most of what we say is nonverbal. It's the mannerisms, the voice intonation, the timing that distinguishes the best from the forgotten. It is the charisma, the trustworthiness, the honesty, the je ne sais quoi. If you want to be a master coach, you should learn how to act. Not to deceive, but to inspire, to convey a message that reaches its destination. Good luck.